There's a small black box bolted to a pole near that Walmart you've been eyeing for tonight's stay. It's not a streetlight, it's not a traffic camera. It's photographing your license plate right now, and it's already logged the last 2 nights you parked there too. That box has a name. It's called a flock safety camera. And if you drive a Sprinter, a Transit, or a ProMaster, it is one of the biggest changes to van life in the last decade, and almost nobody in this community understands how it actually works. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what these cameras do, why repeat overnight parking is exactly the kind of pattern that makes you visible to them, which states are pushing back against them, and the 3 moves that separate van lifers who get a knock on the window from van lifers who never do. Stick around for the part most channels won't tell you because it directly contradicts the advice you've probably already heard. What this device actually is. Forget the rumor mill. This isn't radar, it isn't thermal imaging, and it isn't some secret government drone program. It's called Automated License Plate Recognition, or ALPR, and the company leading the market is Flock Safety. Solar-powered, about the size of a softball, mounted on a pole with 0 wiring and 0 permits required in most towns. It photographs the rear of every vehicle that passes, reads the plate, and logs the make, model, and color into a searchable database. Here's why that matters to you specifically. Flock's own marketing calls this vehicle fingerprinting. The system doesn't just log your plate, it also logs vehicle characteristics. Think white cargo van, ladder rack, bike mounted on the back. Well enough that investigators can search by those details even when a plate is unreadable. That's not speculation, that's how the company describes its own product. Now compare that to what most van lifers think they're dealing with, a bored cop doing a slow drive-by at 2 a.m. That's the old model. The new model doesn't need an officer anywhere nearby. The camera records the pattern. Whether that leads to anything depends entirely on the agency running it, what alerts they've configured, what their local policy is, and whether an officer chooses to act on it. A human only enters the picture once someone decides to look. But here's the part that should still get your attention. The raw material for that decision, your plate, your van, your movements, is being collected whether anyone ever acts on it or not. Why overnight parking specifically? This is where it gets uncomfortable, and it's the part I haven't seen explained clearly anywhere else. These cameras aren't built or marketed to catch van dwellers. They're sold for stolen vehicle recovery, burglary investigations, and violent crime cases, and departments point to real numbers behind those uses. But the database doesn't know the difference between a stolen car circling a block and a van lifer staying a few nights in the same neighborhood. Both are just repeat sightings of the same plate in the same zone. Some agencies do configure alerts around that kind of repeat presence, and whether yours becomes visible that way depends on local policy, not on Flock designing the system to find you. Think about what that means for how most of you actually travel. Full-time van lifers don't move every single night. You find a quiet street, you stay a few days, you move on. That exact rhythm, the one that makes van life sustainable instead of exhausting, happens to produce exactly the kind of repeat plate signature these systems are good at surfacing, even though catching you was never the point. Compare this to a decade ago. 10 years ago, stealth parking worked because enforcement was reactive. A neighbor had to notice you, get annoyed, and call it in. Today, the record exists before any neighbor ever notices you at all. Whether anyone acts on that record is a separate question, but the data is there waiting either way. That's not a small shift. That's the entire game changing under your wheels, while most of the community is still running strategies built for 2015.
Where this is actually happening. I want to be precise here, because fear without facts just makes you paranoid instead of prepared, and paranoid decisions are expensive decisions. Flock Safety reports operating in the range of 5,000 communities across the United States, in nearly every state, with contracts held by police departments, private HOAs, and business districts. Berkeley, California has more than 50 of these cameras on public streets. Many suburban and small-town departments have adopted them specifically because they're cheap to install and don't require adding officers. Here's the contrast that actually matters for your route planning. A handful of states, New Hampshire among them, have banned state police from using ALPR systems at all. Other states have active legislation limiting how long the data can be kept or who can access it. But in most states, there is no specific law governing this yet. That means your legal protection against being tracked literally changes the moment you cross a state line, and most van life content creators are still giving you one-size-fits-all parking advice that ignores that completely.
The uncomfortable insight. Here's the part that's going to ruffle some feathers, and I stand by it. Most van life advice about stealth parking is now outdated for anyone parking in a mid-sized or larger U.S. city. The old checklist, black out the windows, don't run the generator, look like a work van, was designed to beat human observation. It does nothing against a camera that doesn't care what your van looks like on the inside. It only cares what your plate and vehicle shape look like on the outside, and how many times that combination shows up in the same zip code. I'll go further. The irony is that the sketchy-looking van probably isn't your risk. It's the nice one. A clean, late-model Sprinter with a raised roof and a bike rack is memorable and easy to search for by vehicle features alone, and it's the one most likely to be circling the same 3 neighborhoods on a repeating loop. The more capable and comfortable your rig, the more consistent your movement pattern tends to be, and consistency is exactly what these systems are good at surfacing.
Who should actually worry about this? Let's be honest about who this affects, because blanket fear helps nobody. If you're doing the occasional weekend trip and parking overnight once or twice, you're statistical noise to these systems. This is not a video telling you to panic about a Friday night at a trailhead. If you're a full-timer working a repeating loop through the same metro area, and a meaningful number of you are because that's often where the work, the family, or the healthcare access is, this changes your risk calculus completely. Retirees doing seasonal loops between the same handful of cities every year should pay especially close attention, because the same handful of cities every year is precisely the multi-month pattern these systems are best at surfacing. What actually works now? So what do you do instead of the tired blackout curtains advice? First, vary your zone, not just your street. Moving from one block to the next block over doesn't beat a camera network that covers half the city. You need to rotate between genuinely separate areas, not just separate addresses. Second, know before you go. Public interest projects have started mapping reported flock camera density by county, which means for the first time you can actually check a region's camera saturation before you commit to a parking plan there, the same way you'd check elevation before a mountain pass. Third, and this is the one nobody wants to hear, private land beats public street parking in camera-heavy metros. Every time. A driveway, a farm stay, a paid overnight lot isn't just more comfortable. In a flock-saturated city, it's the difference between being invisible and being a logged pattern. The bigger picture. I want to leave the moral panic out of this because that's not useful to you and it's not accurate either. Departments running these systems point to real numbers: recovered stolen vehicles, faster case closures, arrests tied directly to plate matches. That's not nothing, but there's a real cost on the other side, too. Courts in Virginia have already ruled that pulling location history from these networks without a warrant crosses a constitutional line, and lawsuits challenging these systems are active in multiple states right now. This is not settled law, it's a moving target, and that's exactly why treating your parking strategy as figure it out once and never think about it again no longer works. Bottom line, if you're serious about full-time van life in or near any mid-size U.S. city, the surveillance layer is now as real a planning factor as fuel range or holding tank capacity, and pretending otherwise is how people end up with an unexpected knock on the window in a very awkward conversation. You don't need to be scared, you need to be current. The van lifers who thrive over the next 5 years won't be the ones with the best blackout curtains. They'll be the ones who understood the system changed and adjusted their routes accordingly. I think most of the van life community is dangerously behind on this, and I'd rather you hear it from someone who tells you the uncomfortable version than from a knock on your window at 3 a.m. Have you actually spotted one of these cameras on your route, or gotten flagged without ever seeing a cop show up? Drop it in the comments. I'm building the next video around real reports from this community, and I want to know what you're actually seeing out there.